we're talking about the completion of Christ. It's what he did. Christ was not just alone. Christ represented God. He represented the Holy Spirit. And so the deity is the inclusiveness of Jesus, the work that he did. And so when we talk about the deity of Christ, we find in John, more so in the other Gospels, John started out with him in his beginning. Then we find that John now began to identify him as the Son. And then you're going to find, when we get a little further over in John, the Holy Spirit. So John started off with the beginning of the Father. Then he's now into the deity of the Son. And then he's going to get into the Holy Spirit. Now, before I go into further, how many of you all got into prayer this week? Went to prayer somewhere and got in that hour of prayer? All righty. Okay. And how many of you fast? And how many read St. John chapter 6? All right, next week is chapter 7. You that didn't raise your hand for none of them fast 3 days. And and read all of the books of John so you catch up. So, all right, now, what we're going to do in today's lesson in chapter 6, we're going to see how Jesus continued to reveal his sonship. And verses 1 through 15, it tells about how Jesus fed 5,000 men. And that was not counting the women's, nor was it counting the children. And the people was following Jesus, and there was a reason for them following him. They was following him, first of all, because they were looking for signs and they were looking for wonders, and they was following him for that. But then Jesus went to the other side of the sea called Galilee, and in another language it's called the Sea of Tiberias. Now a large crowd followed him, and many of them was pilgrims on the way to the Jerusalem for the annual Passover celebration. They was following him wherever he went to watch him heal the sick. Now they was pilgrim there, and they was coming into Jerusalem for the Passover, which we call Easter, or we call the Resurrection Sunday now. And so they was coming for that. But now one thing you see, it said that many of them followed him wheresoever he went, because he was watching him heal the sick and watching him do miracles. And so a lot of time, people are coming, when they hear a name brand evangelist come to the city, they don't come just to, because they want something. They just come to see. They just looky-loos to see what's going to happen, so they can say, I saw him, or I saw that person. And it's the same way on the natural side. A person can be a rock or actors or actress, and people want to get close to them and want to see them. And sometimes at these rock festivals, some of our young ladies, and somebody need to talk to them, sometimes they faint. Sometimes somebody needs to pour some water on them when they come to and tell them that's not necessary. It's not necessary. Now, so when Jesus went up into the hills and sat down with his disciples, he soon saw a great multitude of people climbing the hills looking for him. Now at the end of the day, Jesus said to Philip, where can we buy bread to feed all of these people? Where can we buy bread? Now Jesus said this because he already knew what he was going to do. He was just saying it to tempt Philip to see what Philip was going to say. Now, by asking for human solution, knowing that there was not one, nothing they could do, Jesus highlighted the miracle that he was about to perform. And verses 5 through 7, Jesus asked Philip where they could buy such amount of bread to feed these folks. And Philip told him they didn't, in other words, first of all, Philip said they didn't have enough money. He might have been, knowing what Judas had did, and he knew they didn't have enough money to do it because Judas had stole it. But he said if they had that much, they just couldn't do it because it wouldn't be enough to feed everybody that was there. Then Jesus looked at him, and sometimes we allow what we have to stop us from getting what God wants us to have. And so we have to be very careful and just saying, well, I have this, I can do this, and I can do that. But give God an opportunity to bless, and then you don't jump in front of God and hinder the blessing. Jesus wanted to teach Philip a lesson, that financial resources are not always the most important decision we can make. Philip placed a limit on what Jesus could do. Now, we must not allow our estimation of what can or cannot be done when God assigns us a task. When God gives us a task, let's don't try to figure out, well, we can do this or we can't do this. Just do what he tells you to do. In verses, and if we trust God, we will see miracles. In verses 8 through 9, the disciples had nothing to offer the people, but a lad brought what he had for himself. However, he was willing to give it to help feed the people, even though Peter and Andrew spoke up and said, there's a lad here with 5 barley loaves and a couple of fish. But what are those among such great mob, a great amount of people? Now, here's the thing. They didn't have anything to give, but they criticized what the young boy had to give. So he got 5 barley loaves and he got a couple of fishes, but what is that among all these folks? Well, they didn't even have to bring it up. But Jesus said the disciples had nothing to give but criticism. But the lad was willing to give what little he had. Now, that had to be a special boy. Because you can't hardly get a young child to give up their lunch. Huh? I think some of you, if you go back and remember when you was in school and you brought your lunch, you didn't just give that lunch up. It may not have been the best, but you didn't give it up. And so this lad was willing to give what he had. And that's all God said. And watch what Jesus said in the next thing. The disciples didn't have anything, but it was all, Jesus said to them after the criticism, and it made all the difference. If we offer nothing to God, he will have nothing to use. But he can take what we have and make it great. When you offer God something, what you have, see, you're wondering about you don't have enough, but just give God what you have. The young man, the lad only had 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes, and he was willing to give that up. Now, watch this. This is where the miracle came in. The miracle was that the young lad gave it up. Yeah. Now, he put it in Jesus' hand. Jesus said, give it to me. He put it in Jesus' hand. Now, Jesus blessed the bread and blessed the fish. Yeah. And that tells us that nothing happens in our lives unless God bless us. You got to have God blessings on your life before you can produce anything. And that's the difference in being saved and not being saved. If you're saved, God has blessed your life. And when God has blessed you, you are different. You're different. You're just not an ordinary person once you are blessed. And so God blessed it. Now, after God blessed it, then he passed it out. He gave it to the disciples and told the disciples, have the folks to sit down. Having them to sit down was organizing them. You can do a whole lot if you just organize. If you just organize, you can get a whole lot of things done just through organization. And so he organized them and told them to sit down. When they sit down, then he told them to give it to them. And they gave it to them. Now, it took them a while, to pass out enough food to feed 5,000 men and then feed their families. Some may have one child, some may not have had any, but just to feed their family. And then the Bible said that they all ate until they were full. That means that Jesus turned 2 fish and 5 barley loaves into a smorgasbord. They could eat all they wanted. All they want. And they was filled. And then Jesus said to the disciples, now go back and pick up the fragments. And don't let nothing be lost. Now, that tell you that the disciples was need of food because they had 12 empty baskets. And they filled the basket up. And the little boy got his lunch back. So whatever you give to Jesus, Jesus will multiply it. It may seem like it's little, but just give it to Jesus. Put it in his hand. Just put it in his hand and watch what God do with it. Now, there's also, it tells the story in verses 10 to 13, tell about the miracle of Jesus performing, but there's a lesson in the leftover. The lesson in the leftover is that they took up more than they gave. Now, that's sort of hard to do. If you give little and you get back more than you gave, that sounds like Jesus. Y'all ain't going to talk to me. I said, that sounds like Jesus. Because he's the only somebody that can give you more back than what you receive. And that's why you that was not here, and I'm coming back to the lesson, but you that was not here on Thursday night. On Thursday night, I talked about what the difference between wealthy and the difference between just getting along, barely getting along. And we talked about the tithe. And you can never get really ahead in the church without the tithe. Because even if you think you're ahead, God will blow on it. He'll blow on it. Now, the tithe is the insurance. Help me say the tithe is the insurance. It's the policy that God said, I would pour out you a blessing that you will not be able to receive. Now, what did he do? He said, I'll bless the fruit of your body, the fruit of your crop, your cattle, all of those things. That's the guaranteed blessing. That's the blessing of your health, your strength, all of those things. But now, it didn't tell you that you would get wealthy and above of that unless you give. And so the different in tithing, you tithe, that is what God recommends. That's what you're supposed to do. That is legal. But everything you give above your tithing is a seed. And the farmer understand this, and they understood that in the Bible much better than we do today, because they knew that 10% of their crop automatically went to the temple to feed the folks in the temple. That's why God said, at my house, bring the tithes into my house, in my house. So the tithes is for the operation of the church. But now, if you want to become wealthy, then the Bible said, give, and it'll be given back to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And a farmer knows then, if he got 90% of his seeds left, if he eat them up, he's not going to have a crop next year. He ate the seeds. He know that he got to set aside a certain amount of those seeds to plant, and he know that a seed represents reproduction. He know that every seed can reproduce itself at least 100-fold, or 60-fold, or 30-fold. And so that one seed means that he got something for the next year. Now, I told him this morning, you don't want to be like the man that said a guy, his car broke down in front of a farmer's house, and he called a mechanic, and while the mechanic was fixing the car, he saw the farmer sitting on the porch in a swing. So some of the folks know that from the back south. You know, the folks had them swings on the front porch, and they be swinging. He goes over to the man and says to him, how is your crop coming along, your wheat? He said, well, I didn't plant it this year, so it looked like it was going to be a drought, so I didn't plant any wheat. He said, what about your cotton? He said, well, if I planted the cotton, the boll weevils eat them up, so I didn't plant no cotton. And so he said, well, what about your barley? He said, I didn't plant that either, because it could be a flood, and then it'll flood it out. He said, well, what are you going to have for nature? He said, well, I'm just praying, hoping and praying that God bless me. Well, he didn't plant anything. If you don't plant nothing, how are you hoping and praying that God going to give you something? You talking about you waiting for your ship to come in, you ain't sent out a canoe. So that's me. But things like that, that's the way people think in the church. They haven't planted anything, the seed. The farmer know that if he's going to have a crop for next year, he got to plant the seed. He got to save some of the seeds to plant. And some of the seeds he can eat. Some of them he can sell. And the next year, matter of fact, if he have 20 acres, he plant 20 acres. He give 10% to the church. And then a wealthy, he give so much to what he want to give it to the church, to build things, etc., or to other folks or whatever. Then that's where the blessing come in. And then he plants next year. He may have enough money to buy another 20 acres. Then he can double what he's planted. And then he can triple and on and on. But if he eat up his seeds, he ain't going to plant nothing. And you know that's a universal language. Nothing from nothing in any language equals nothing. Is that right, Deacon Jackson? He's a mathematician. Is that right? Nothing from nothing in any language equals what? Nothing. All right, so let's look at verses 14 through 15. Now, God gives in abundance, and he takes whatever we can offer him in time. You don't have to have money. What about your time? What about your ability? What about resources? And God will multiply its effectiveness beyond our wildest expectation. Now, if we take the first step in making ourselves available to him, he will show us just how great we can be and use and take any advantage of anything he wants. So he goes to the other side of the lake. Help me say he goes to the other side of the lake. So he gets on the other side of the lake, and the people follow him there.